Well, thank you again for coming here today to worship with us on this Father's Day. Most of you know that this has been a tough Father's Day for me. A week ago Monday, my father passed. And so the last 2 weeks have been very, very emotional going through all that. And last week I was away for services. So it was a bit challenging for me to think about preaching on Father's Day. So let me just apologize in advance if I don't quite get through this the way I should. But through the services, I was reminded of a song my father used to sing to my mother very often. Some of you will remember it. You're from that era. It was from a 1965 Broadway show called Carousel. It was a Rodgers and Hammerstein tune called Walk Through the Storm. Very simple but powerful lyrics. When you walk through a storm, keep your head held high and don't be afraid of the dark. Because at the end of the storm is a golden sky and a sweet mellow sound of a lark. Walk on through the wind. Walk on through the rain, though your dreams seem tossed and blown. Walk on. Walk on. With hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. What beautiful, powerful lyrics. Until you realize the context in which it's sung. If you go back and see the play, it comes at this very odd time. This young man has just committed suicide because he committed a theft. Because he was so desperately in need, he did the wrong thing. And there he was dying. And his widow was there holding him as he was dying. And this cousin comes in and sings this song. Beautiful words, but in a tragic, tragic setting. And in a way, that little vignette, it talks about life in a very poignant way. All of us are kind of in that same mode. If we're honest, we look around the world and we see so much tragedy, so much heartache, so much hurt, and yes, so much death. And yet here we are as followers of God, as followers of Christ, and we're supposed to be singing songs of encouragement and faith. There's a disconnect there for us sometimes in our souls because we're saying, how can we sincerely worship God, praise God, rejoice in God when there's so much tragedy in the world? It causes us to have crisis in faith from time to time, and we shout out to God, this should not be, this is wrong. And so we've been working through a series, what happens when God seems wrong? And we see the badness of the world. How do we get our arms around that? How do we move through that? How do we explain that? And thankfully, God is not afraid of that question. God invites that question. He tells the prophet to ask the hard questions. And he speaks into that broken world with words of wisdom for us to figure out not necessarily all the answers because we can't get our heads around the why of this, that, or the other thing, but we can figure out the bigger picture of what God is doing. And so we come now to the last talk in that series. And if you missed some of the others, just go on our website, go to our YouTube channel. They're all out there as we walk through this little tiny book in the Old Testament from the prophet Habakkuk. It's only 3 chapters. And this week we get to the last chapter, and it's a hymn of praise. It's the prophet praising God because he's come to a new place in his life where he's figured out not necessarily all the answers, but how he's going to go forward from here, how to respond to the challenges of hardship in our life. It begins very simply of this discovery of God's mercy. Look again at this opening verses here. Verse 2 says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Lord, repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. In wrath, remember mercy. The prophet is looking back across the history of God's people. And remember, of course, that God never wanted any of this. All this hatred, all this killing, all this murder, all this death, all this desecration of his creation. He never wanted any of this. That was our choice. History of human nature making many, many, many bad decisions. And we're fooled sometimes to think that God's okay with that because he doesn't do that. But what the story of God's scriptures tell us is that from time to time God chooses to reveal his anger. To say enough is enough. He's tired of watching all the abuse of the gifts that he has given. And he just acts on behalf of his people. Acts sometimes in disciplining his people. Sometimes the anger of God is revealed. And he's done with this because in the end, he is a holy God. And on his holy earth, he only wants holiness. And we can't be fooled by the fact that sometimes he lets it go on because the same holy God is there and sometimes his anger and wrath is revealed. The prophet is looking back across the history of God's people and seeing that. And he's saying, in our day, could you act as well? You know, right now, if we look around, Paul says it in his letter to the Romans, the wrath of God is now being revealed all around us. All this messed up, screwed up world around us, that's God saying enough is enough. You don't understand the damage that you can do to hurt each other. It comes at all different levels. We're seeing it everywhere. Now, sometimes we deserve the judgment ourselves, like we know. Like, you know, when the little lights go on behind you and you're like, yep, I was speeding, I deserve it. Not that that's ever happened to me or anything, but you know the feeling, right? Sometimes it's because we deserve it, but other times that justice, it seems out of kilter. We make a little mistake, and then our world falls apart. We've known a few people to have one too many drinks, and then their whole world falls apart. Sometimes justice doesn't seem quite fair. We don't get justice. Sometimes we're the victim. We didn't do anything to deserve the mess we're in. But that's what evil does. That's what the judgment does. It just kind of gets everybody caught up in this mess. So we see the anger of God against unrighteousness all around us. It's the violation of the moral laws of the universe. That's what we're living in. And we're living with it all the time. But the prophet is saying, as this happens, as we see it, don't forget your mercy, God. Don't forget that we need you to help us through this. Because we don't get it. We don't understand it. Yes, we made a mistake because we're not perfect. We need your mercy because we don't deserve what we're getting now. We're victims here. It's way overreach. Our family members, they don't deserve what they're getting right now. We need your mercy. God, we need you in this world to remind us that we are broken people, failed people, sinful people, sometimes weak people. God, we need you in this world to remind us that yes, you're a holy God, but you're a merciful God who understands the struggles we face. And something happens when we cross that bridge and we see a different God, not the angry God who's judging evil, because that's just the way it's going to work. We violate God's ways and judgment is just part of that's what's going to happen. But we see the God who is merciful, who understands the brokenness of humanity and reaches out to us to heal us. And something happens to our psyche when we accept the merciful God. Now we can see God not just delivering mercy, but now also deliverance, salvation for us out of the mess in some way. Look again at the text in verse 12. The text says, "In wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot." The image there is taken from the Exodus event. You remember the people of God were captive there for hundreds of years. Initially it was their fault, but then over the centuries, generation after generation stayed in slavery. Children were born, it wasn't their fault they were in slavery, they just were born in the wrong place at the wrong time. And after 400 years, God finally had enough, and he said it's time for the anger to be revealed. And he reaches out and he delivers this people out of slavery and he leads them into a new land. It is a mercy that he finally expresses, and he expresses it to deliver people out of slavery. He never wanted them to be in slavery from the beginning. He wanted them to be free, to love one another. But now it was time to make that a reality in their lives, to demonstrate it. Now tomorrow, of course, we in this country celebrate Juneteenth. It's an important day in our history, made a federal holiday in 2021. It marks a day when, in Texas, slaves were freed. Now, the significant part there is that the Emancipation Act was actually done 2 years earlier. President Lincoln signed that into law for the whole country. But the problem was that in some of the southern states, nobody had experienced that truth yet. It was still a theory. But 2 years later, in 1965, that truth became a reality for the slaves in Texas. And now it becomes a symbol for us to remember the emancipation and the freedom from slavery for folks all over this country, especially those minorities that were kept in slavery. It's a reminder to us that sometimes there are big and grand and glorious truths proclaimed, but the reality of people's lives is they're still stuck in slavery. Some of us are not slaves politically or economically. We're slaves to brokenness. We're slaves to our emotions. We're slaves to our depression. We're slaves to broken families. We're slaves to all sorts of stuff. And we know in our head that we were emancipated, that Christ saved us, that He came to deliver us from all that. But in our souls, we're still held captive. We still live in fear and anger. That's not become a reality to us yet. What the prophet is praying here is, can we experience the real deliverance, Father? You are a merciful God, yes, but I need to experience your deliverance from that. I need to know that you are God who wants to see me delivered from my slavery. I don't want to be a victim of my own anger and hatred and discouragement and depression. I'm tired of that. God, lift me out of that. The realities are still the same. The world is a broken place. Bad things happen to good people. That's just a normal stuff. But God is there in the world to deliver us from living under the spirit of fear and captivity and imprisonment in which we find ourselves because of this broken world. Our God is not just a God that judges evil. He is a God to rescue us from evil, to deliver us from evil, not just in the world, but in our own souls. When we experience the reality of a delivering God, a God who wants to rescue from us, we have a new hope in this life to carry on through the storm. But then there's another level. Something else that happens in our soul when we discover that sort of God. We discover not just the God of mercy and the God of deliverance, but we also see a God who brings joy. Look again at verse 17. The prophet says, though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will be joyful in God my Savior. You see the contrast there. The world is horrible. The world is not fair. There's no food in the barn. There's no provision. We're out of everything. And yet somehow the prophet says, I can rejoice. How is this possible? How can this be the case? The world is messed up. People are doing, how do you rejoice when there's nothing in the barn? I think you would agree that in our culture we could use some more joy. I see a lot of unhappiness in our culture. And quite frankly, to be transparent, in me sometimes. I think we've been raised about this feeling of happiness, that we deserve it, that it's ours, and if we don't get made happy, then we feel like our life is in crisis. We've created this new category called first world problems. We didn't get our appointment with the hairdresser at the right time. It annoys us. They couldn't accommodate our dog and they messed up his haircut, and it annoys us. We get annoyed by these things because we're not happy. And it goes to our soul, and we get unhappy about silly things. But it's a condition of our culture, and here's the damage we've done. We've infused that into our children because they're giving up now. I mean, you read story after story, a tragic story of these young people giving up and giving in and taking their own lives because they get up in the morning and they're not happy. They're depressed and they're discouraged. There's something in their soul that's defeated and beaten. And you realize there's a God who wants to bring joy to those situations. And some of those folks are in real need, some of them not so much. There are many people that have something to complain about in our culture. They are without food, without money, without health care, without freedom, without hope. But somehow, those who follow God, even in those circumstances, find a joy that's inexplicable. If you've never been to an economically challenged country and gone to church there, you should do that once in your life. Go to one of those places where they have nothing. I mean nothing. Like barely. And they will be up early in the morning ironing their clothes and whatever they've got, and they walk however many miles they do, and they go to church, and then they are singing and worshiping like they are in heaven. And you feel humbled right away that they have something in their head that I don't have. They can find joy in the midst of their poverty even. God is doing a work in them that He can't do in me because I have too much and I whine about the dumbest things. We always respect those people who learn to rejoice in the midst of bad circumstances, and they have discovered a secret. That their joy does not come from their circumstances and their environment and their possessions. Sociologists have taught us that there's a certain level of need that we just need to make sure that we're okay. But once we get past that, there is no correlation between having and being happy. No correlation. Because it's not about having too much. In fact, it becomes dangerous if we have too much. No, what these folks have understood is that what makes us truly joyful is knowing this God who has not given up on us. The God who is with us through the storm. The God who walks through us with the storm. We can rejoice and have hope, not just because we believe in pie in the sky that things will work out, but because we have the true God, the real God, the present God, the loving God, the all-powerful God, the sovereign God, walking through us through each step of that storm. We can find rejoicing there. We can find joy there in the midst of heartache. And then we experience another truth, another level of peace. When we experience God doesn't just deliver mercy and deliverance and joy, there's another whole level of discovering strength in God. Look at the last verse of the chapter. The prophet says, "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights." I don't know if you've ever kind of seen one of these animals, deer or goats. When I was younger, my father was stationed in Fort Richardson, Alaska, and we used to go to the mountain there and watch these mountain goats and these rams just kind of go up the side of these mountains. And it was amazing to see these creatures. Like there was no planning or strategy. They just scattered up through the rocks. And I was just always impressed by their agility. Especially now that I'm older. Agility is not quite there. See, I'm at that age now where you get up from anything, a couch, a bed, you need a strategy, you know? Something has to be around to grab onto, right? That's kind of where I'm at now in my life. But now we have these children's sermons, and we get Jordan and Jackson, and they're up here bouncing around, and you're like, wow, remember those days when you were that agile and you could just like point? What the prophet's telling us is here, our bodies may not feel like doing that, but our spirits can be there. Like when the storms come and the hardships come, you could be as agile spiritually as those deer kind of running up the sides of a mountain. Light, agile, free, because you're not carrying it by yourself. God is carrying it. He's carrying the load. He knows the pain. He understands the pressures. He gets the imperfections in us and in the world. He is there walking with us. It frees us to be the people God has called us to be because of the God who is in our life, walking with us. That's why we can be agile through the storm. So what's the point? Not just of this talk, but I think in a way through the whole series. It's a very simple theological truth that sometimes we lose track of. It's simply this, that our holy God is also a merciful God. Our holy God is also our merciful God. He'll be holy because in the end, everything has to be right. He's not going to settle for anything less than right. He created this world a certain way. He wants it to be that way, and He has not given up on that plan. So wrong is never okay with God. But He's also a merciful God. And He's going to work with us and through us and in us, even though we're not perfect and we're not right and we are often wrong. He's going to work with us because He's a merciful God who will restore us and the world as we commit ourselves to Him. So what's the next step then? What do we do with that truth? How do we apply that great theological truth in our lives? Well, what I'm going to encourage us to do this week is we need to work on receiving, that is accepting, and then extending God's mercy in our lives. This week, learn to accept and then extend God's mercy. Now, accept. What does that mean? You know, sometimes, and I'm just being honest and transparent here, when I realize that I'm losing joy in my life, it's probably because I'm not receiving the mercy of God in my life. I'm not understanding that God gets the brokenness and the failure and the falling short and the heartache and all the rest. God gets that. He's there with me. We don't have to defend ourselves before God. He gets that. He is the merciful God with us. We need to receive God's mercy. We're not going to do it on our own. We're not perfect. We're going to mess up. And by the way, people next to us are going to mess up. We need to accept the mercy of God, be filled by the mercy of God. And then we need to extend it. If we can't fill ourselves with God's mercy, how are we going to give it to anybody else? So this week, how can you be a more merciful person? That annoying person that does whatever they do to aggravate you, how do you respond with mercy instead of anger? God's mercies are new every morning. As we receive His mercy, He will empower us to give His mercy. And together, He will heal us to be the people He's called us to be. We started off with that song. How are we going to walk through a storm and keep our head up high? Well, the truth is we're not alone. We're never alone. Because our good Father, He is with us every step of the way. Let's pray. Father God, we do thank You for this truth. That You are a holy God, and that's just the way the world is going to work. If we don't follow Your ways, it's going to get messed up. But through all that, You are a merciful God, a God who wants to deliver us, empower us, encourage us, bring us joy as we walk with You step by step and day by day. Help us to receive Your mercy and extend Your mercy in greater amounts each and every day. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.